Ian, welcome to the show.
My pleasure to be here.
When you think back to your time, particularly at Liverpool Football Club and the success that you had there, what one story would you like to share with our audience at the very beginning that demonstrates the work that you did, but more importantly, I guess from the football fans listening, the impact that it had on that football club?
I think I go right back to when I was offered the job. So before going to Liverpool, I worked for a management consultancy company. I did 3 days a week working for Spurs, and data in football was a new thing then because, data had only just started being collected and being available about player performance. And went up to Liverpool, met John Henry and Tom Werner from Fenway, and they pitched me, come and run a data department inside a football club. And it was something they'd done in baseball. Baseball is a lot easier a sport to measure than football is. They'd done it and they'd shown they would invest in it in baseball. And they were asking me to do the same thing in football. Not only asking me to do the same thing in football, but when I explained to them the budget and the staff that it would cost, which is a big investment for a club.
What sort of numbers are you talking? Roughly?
So, I asked for 2 full-time staff to start. Data scientists are quite expensive compared to other roles. In the early days, the data was, 6 figures, just raw data costs before you think about storing it, analysing it. And that increased from that point onwards. So by the end, we're spending maybe 2 million a year on the data function of the club. 8 people, lots more data, much bigger databases, more complicated analysis. And that is even for Liverpool, that's a not insignificant amount of money. So for them to say, we believe in this stuff, I knew from day one, the guy in charge is completely bought into this. And then I think I'd fast forward on to probably 2017 when Jurgen arrived, or after Jurgen arrived, the team finally started performing. So we thought we'd put a good team in place, but if you rewind to the end of the Brendan Rodgers era, it really wasn't seen on the outside like we had a good team. So Jurgen came in his interview, said, you need some new players. You don't need a complete squad rebuild on day one, which was in contrast to what other candidates had said. And so here's Klopp coming in saying, I think you've done all right with your players, and we've got the youngest squad in the league. It's that was the point which the hard work, I could see the light at the end of the tunnel.
And was Jurgen the kind of manager that was happy to allow data to have a really big role in this need for new players?
Yes, is the short answer. So I think it was Michael Gove during Brexit said, we've heard quite enough from experts. So that turned out well. Jurgen is not like Michael Gove. He believes in expertise. And he also believes as the leader of an organisation, he doesn't have the time or the bandwidth to watch every player in Europe, to decide who we're going to sign, to understand from a training point of view how to get the players in peak physical condition. So he's happy to delegate that out to the experts. So he knew what the data department did. He knew the impact we had on recruitment, but it wasn't, Jurgen is not the kind of manager you show a spreadsheet to. That's not the way to get him excited. But he understood what the expertise was and the benefit it was bringing to the club.
So how did you get him excited?
So he's a very emotional person in a good way. He loves a story about, as we all do, a story about players. And that story goes alongside some video work on the players. So managers tend to be visual thinkers. My colleagues in the video analysis and video scouting departments were really good at crystallising the strengths and weaknesses of players into a 30-minute presentation that came with a narrative over it. And it wasn't a narrative that said, the data has shown he's created 25% chance of a goal from this situation. But then on the defensive side, he does allow a little bit more danger to happen. And that's at the 5% extra chance of conceding a goal. It's, when you think about wide forward play, you need your wide forward to cut inside. Here's the clips that say that. And things to worry about this player. Here are the defensive clips where he doesn't track back as much. And then it's Jurgen's job to say, I believe I can make him track back.
So would you take us then to a moment where maybe Jurgen Klopp had a certain player in mind? You looked at the data and actually recommended a different player, and how that process worked from you looking at the raw data, compiling things, going to Jurgen, and then eventually convincing this man who, to the outside world is the leader of that football club. So it kind of rests on his shoulders, right? Yeah. How did you convince him to go with your decision, not his?
Yeah, I think it's important to say it's our decision.
Yeah.
So as I talk about in the book, data is only ever one part of the story with a player. Video tells you still today, even with the much greater depth of data we've got, video tells you things that you can't see in the data.
Like what, for example?
So tracking data is where you see the trajectories of all 22 players on the pitch, but it's just 1 point per player. So you don't know if they're back to goal, facing goal. You don't know if they're making a kicking action. You don't know if they're lying on the ground. So from the data, you say, well, why didn't he cover that run? It's like, well, he was lying on the floor. He'd just been fouled. The data doesn't see some of those things. You can infer it from the data. And data is getting, the next generation of tracking data does tell you all that stuff. Body language, things that coaches find important that I pay no importance to as a data scientist. All the soft, it's wrong to call it soft, but Jurgen had this no arseholes policy. And so, finding out what's this person like before deciding to spend a large amount of money on them.
And were there players you would have recommended that he then investigated and actually he decided that culturally they wouldn't fit?
Yeah, it's always, one of the side effects of having data function at a club is we had a website with a list of players on it, and I always suggest not doing this, but you can rank them from best to worst and then just look down the list. So look at the best young players and think it's typically on loan from Chelsea, on loan from Manchester City, and you keep going down the list. Like, this guy in the Spanish second division looks amazing. I've never heard of this guy, so you have a little look on the video as well. Sort of say to the scouting department, what about this guy? Yeah, we know him well, terrible habits, very unprofessional, is just not going to succeed at a club. Right. That's not to say people can't change, but there's kind of like a hidden risk.
It's interesting. So that's why a player of that quality would be in that league and not being used, because other people have also seen perhaps the same trends.
Yeah, maybe so.
So anyway, back to the question of a player Jurgen wanted. You thought maybe there was a better option based on the data, and then eventually that was...
Yeah, the famous one was...
Ever feel like there's just not enough of you to go round at work, at home, everywhere? Well, the truth is the thing that actually keeps me showing up for things that matter is not harder work or better routines. It's sleep. And getting the right kind of sleep just helps me be present as a dad, focused at work, and still have the energy for the life that I want. And you know what? You can train, you can plan, you can grind all you like, but if your sleep isn't right, I think nothing else sticks. And that's where Simba comes in. Using real sleep data, Simba has designed hybrid mattresses that support your spine, reduce motion from your partner, and help you stay cool throughout the night. It's all about deeper, uninterrupted sleep, the kind that actually fuels recovery, focus, and performance. And Simba's innovation has earned them over 100 sleep awards and 6 Which Best Buy titles across their range, including the adjustable hybrid pillow, created to help you achieve your best night's sleep. They offer a 200-night no-quibble trial, a 10-year guarantee, and next-day delivery straight to your door. Simba is the world's most 5-star reviewed mattress brand, but if it doesn't work for you, you get your money back completely risk-free. You don't realise how much better you could be sleeping until you try a Simba. Shop now at simbasleep.com/high performance. This episode of High Performance is brought to you by Sage and their AI-powered productivity assistant, Sage Copilot. Now, this is where Sage is bringing their 40-plus years of experience into the world of AI to help businesses like yours solve some of your biggest challenges in a way that's actually useful and not overwhelming. So if you're a small or medium-sized business and you need some extra help managing cash flow, chasing payments, or filing VAT, Sage Copilot is the answer. Take payment chasing, for example, right? Sage customers can get paid 7 days faster with Sage Copilot because it does the chasing for you with automatic invoice reminders at the click of a button. Get started for free. Search Sage Accounting.
The famous one was Mo Salah, of course. It's very easy to talk about this player today. And it was summer 2017. And again, full credit to Jurgen, and it kind of shows what sort of a leader he is, that we were always backroom staff and never said anything. He was front of house. And had he wanted to take full credit for Mo's signing, we wouldn't have said anything. We'd just be happy that the player succeeded. But the sort of person Jurgen is, he did give credit where he didn't have to. And so his preference was Julian Brandt, who was an attacking midfielder at Leverkusen. Hindsight bias is a terrible thing. So people have said to me, you compare Brandt and Mo today. There's miles between the two. But at the time, they were among the best young forwards in Europe. Not so much between them. Mo just fit our style much better. We did rate him higher, and he played in the right role, so that sort of wide forward role. Brandt could play there. He's more of an attacking midfielder. Now, Jurgen, being German, knew that market really well, had his own network in Germany, giving really positive reports about Brandt. And we kind of agreed. It was like, yeah, he's a great player, but if you look at the price point, it's higher. The performance is lower, and the ceiling for Mo was also higher.
So what in the data showed you the ceiling for Mo was higher?
So players go through an aging curve. So start playing in your late teens, early 20s, your performances typically aren't the highest level. Those performances improve with experience of playing against top level opposition, typically till you're about 27. Centre-backs skew older, wingers skew a bit younger. And then the performance sort of slowly declines. And Mo was just on a trajectory that said, okay, it was a good case scenario. He could be one of the best players in the world. So I think we rated him above Premier League average at the age of 24 when he was playing in Italy. And you just sort of list who are the under 24 wide forwards who are above average and not already playing for a Champions League club. And it was Mo. That was it. Yeah. It's quite unusual for that to happen. And then the price point was low for two reasons. Roma were in financial distress, so that market knowledge was really important. And that's that's my colleagues at the club. That's our analysis didn't say Roma are in financial distress. And the other factor was he failed at Chelsea. So when we signed Mo, I remember saying to my boss, I can't believe that. Why aren't Arsenal and Chelsea, well, obviously not Chelsea, why aren't Arsenal and Man United in for him? And I don't know if it's true or not, but his idea was Mo had been tarred with this brush of failure at Chelsea. If you look at it, he was behind Eden Hazard in the pecking order. Of course, you're not going to start as a 21-year-old if Hazard's first choice. Mourinho was the manager. Mourinho likes older, experienced players. Those two things kind of explained why he didn't play at Chelsea.
But those sort of broad brush dismissals of players must be common within football. So I'm interested in how do you push somebody to dig that bit deeper and think about some of those perspectives you've just offered?
Yeah, it's a challenge, and quite often people don't dig deeper. If they did, it would have been more difficult for us to sign Mo. And I think that's where data helps, is it gives you an objective history to compare about. It's like, okay, he's failed at Chelsea, but this is the list of players that had similar performances to him at a similar age and a similar amount of experience. They're all hits, or they're 90% hits. So it gives you something to weigh that Chelsea failure against. And also, yeah, just even digging into the Chelsea failure is something I don't know. I think other people didn't do. Yeah. I think not just in football, but in life, doing something different sets you up to fail. And so the way to not fail and the way to sort of get your next job in football is kind of to do the same thing as everyone else is doing.
Nobody gets sacked for employing IBM. Yeah.
And signing Mo was something you could get sacked for if it didn't work out. Like we knew in Liverpool with the owners we had and with Jurgen as the leader that, it gives you that safety to make those braver decisions. But a lot of clubs, I sort of completely understand why you'd be reticent to sign Mo.
And did Jurgen ever ask the question about Mo's struggles at Chelsea?
No, that was the great thing about him not being a Premier League manager. He didn't have this fixation of they failed in the Premier League, or you have to have proven it in the Premier League before you can come to my club. A lot of our signings didn't have Premier League experience before they came to the club. And, Premier League experience reduces the risk, increases the chance of success. There's much less variance in the performance, but that comes at price. And so our question was, is that extra price worth paying? 40% premium, same player, Premier League experience or no Premier League experience.
Is that right? Can I ask a question about failure? Because you've looked at so much data about footballers. A footballer who has a failure on his record, we talk so often about failure being a good thing on this show. Does the data show you that actually failure at a young age is not a bad thing for a footballer to have gone through?
You know what? I've never looked at that question.
Really?
But, let me check the data.
I'd love to know, actually. Because it finally would put data in the face of what we believe, which is that failure gives you lessons, failure builds your resilience, failure reminds you of all the things that went wrong and that you could have done better at the time. So I'd be fascinated to know, actually.
I think that the real superstars don't have that failure, but 99.99% of players aren't the huge superstars, and that certainly wasn't the market Liverpool was shopping in at the time. There's always some compromise you have to make on a player, and the question is which of those compromises is overvalued or undervalued. And that, failure, if the player's failed because he was always late for training and not fit and so on, it's like, okay, well, maybe that failure is bad news for the future. But if there are simple explanations, and it's not Mo's fault he failed at Chelsea, and he didn't really fail, he just didn't play.
But there was a really interesting phrase you used there about the support you had from above, and with Jurgen, you said, I had a degree of safety. And I was thinking of a friend of mine that works within an elite club who would sometimes offer a counter point of view. And I remember once he told me that he was asked by the coach that he did it with remind me how many caps you've won for your country. So it immediately shut down ever challenging or disagreeing with that particular individual. I'm interested in the psychological safety that was obviously there for you to be able to come and make suggestions or offer a different perspective without feeling that you were going to be ridiculed or shut down. Would you explain a little bit around those conditions, how they were created and why they were so important?
Yeah, it's something unusual at a football club, and it comes from the top. It has to come from the top. And in those early days when the club wasn't doing very well, there was a conflict between the manager and what the new things that we were trying to do. So there certainly wasn't a psychological safety when it came to talking to the manager, but we knew...
Brendan Rodgers.
Yeah, but we knew from above that we were always given the feedback, don't worry, we know this is a long-term process. We believe in what you're doing. And I think even though the things that happened and the signings that we made at the club were not great for various reasons in those early years, the owners could see the names that we were putting forward and our preferences for transfers. And after 2 or 3 years, this list of names looks quite good. And that gives the owners some belief that, we have something to add to the process. It's absolutely the case that your normal experience in a football club is zero or very little psychological safety. I had a conversation with equivalent person working for another club, and they asked, how using your political capital to try and get the important decisions made, how do you go about using that political capital? So I wouldn't know how to start answering that question. I just go to the sporting director or the manager or the owner and say, no to this player for A, B and C, yes to that player for A, B and C. And it's just an open conversation, no politics. And that's like a hidden edge that Liverpool had, was we just did the work and no politics, no blame if things go wrong.
Okay. So in the era where Brendan was the manager, what was your sort of lived experience then? You would come with the suggestion of a player and the data that you believe backed it up. What would happen then?
Yeah, so the owner's idea was a good one, which was the manager's got a lot to bring to the conversation as well, and the manager has to be convinced about the quality of the player. So in the early days, we did bring players like Aspas, for example, who went back to Spain and ended up having a great career in Spain, but brought players that the manager wasn't convinced by. And so
like
the
you,
idea,
for example.
Well, Iago Aspas would be a great a great one. Who else? So many players, so long ago. Balotelli would be. So Balotelli was an interesting one because he was an unusual case of the data being brilliant on Balotelli. It's like, how is this player available for any fee, let alone the fee that Milan wanted? To be fair to Brendan, he wasn't anti the Balotelli signing. The problem was because we'd argued so much and spent so long trying to get to an agreement on a forwards to sign. It was too late. There was no one left in the market except for Balotelli. And so I think Brendan wasn't necessarily against the signing, but also there was kind of like, there was a ready-made excuse if he fails. It's like, well, it's Balotelli. What did you expect? Which isn't very fair on the player. I think that was the problem with this compromise approach was we tried it for 3 years and there was just never any movement. So
what do you mean the compromise approach? Just explain that for people who are kind of...
So the idea of the transfer committee was like the manager comes with his preferred players.
Right, so you were part of a transfer committee at that time, right?
So you got the manager's view, the data's view, the finance and owner's view, and then the traditional scouting view as well. Yeah. That's how it worked with Jurgen. Like nothing changed behind the scenes. If the owner's idea was like wisdom of the crowds, if everyone thinks this is a good idea, the chance of failure is much lower than...
But would you all sit together and debate this individual from all those different perspectives?
Yeah, I was lucky enough that I think it was only one of those meetings I actually sat in person. I was like, you know what, I can't sit in any more of these meetings. It was just stupid and negative. It was like we'd get nowhere. There was the idea of a committee is you sit down and compromise. There's no compromise from the manager's side, and that kind of hardened the other side as well. So it was just arguments with no progress.
And that was because the manager sort of had specific players in mind, and didn't believe the data that you were bringing him that would say this person is a good alternative.
Yeah. What happened was if Brendan liked a player that we also liked, then that was great. We'd just sign that player. I think in Brendan's defence, if you're not convinced, you're the front of house. You have to sort of play the player. You have to understand who they are, and if you're not convinced, it's hard. But he could never. I think he could never trust in the process that we put in place. So he could only trust his own eyes and his view, not the extra information that was being brought. So he was, Benteke was his favourite forward, and we failed to sign Diego Costa because of this argument that went on of, if we're going to sign a forward, it has to be Benteke. He's the player that will move Liverpool forward. And there was there's always very little movement until, it comes to the end of the transfer window. It's like, well, we haven't signed anyone. Like my first choice is gone, your first choice is gone. What's left on the table?
But was there any sort of manoeuvring outside of this committee room where you could go and try and influence him or meet someone like Brendan Rodgers privately and have a more a better conversation than what was obviously happening?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't. We just spoke different languages, but my colleagues certainly did that. But for whatever reason, once set on a player, that's it's got to be that player, or I'm not happy with the signing.
What a frustrating period actually for you, because you've got all this data that people are paying money for this data, right? You're spending hours of your life collating this data, and then it's just ending up in a cul-de-sac.
Yes, yeah, frustrating. The outcome is frustrating, but we believed in the process. So a colleague of mine who recently left the club, we had a conversation a few weeks ago, and we agreed, the best time at the club, it didn't seem it at the time. The best time was when things were going wrong, because it brought everyone together And we were kind of trying to convince each other. We're like, this process does work, doesn't it? Because the outcome, occasionally you have to look at the results, and the results were bad. I mean, I remember the conversations at the time thinking, yeah, we think we're onto something. If we can just sort of get the results, get the actual final point of the decision made properly, then we're onto something here.
So can you give us then, say, the 3 most common heuristics or mistakes that people make that would blind them to something so self-evident?
Absolute number one is, I'm a Liverpool fan. So when a player plays well against Liverpool, I think they're a great player, because you have to be great to play well against Liverpool. Player plays well against you. As a manager in particular, it's really vivid, and you've done everything. And Benteke was brilliant, unstoppable against us. And I was thinking, how can he be so effective against Liverpool? I think he had the highest rate of goals against us in the rest of the league. And it's like, one of the pieces of evidence against him is he doesn't score at this rate against anyone else, just us. So that vividness of they played well against us. Similar sort of thing of familiarity. If they come from your league, that's why the premium exists, is the player. On the risk-reward spectrum, it's a much lower risk, much more certain reward.
Can you do it on a wet Wednesday night at Stoke?
Yeah.
Question, yeah.
You asked for 3. What would be the other one? Let's keep it at 2 for now.
Perfect. When you ask the question, give me 2 reasons, and then it will sound lovely.
I'll ask for 1 at that point.
Yeah. So give us 2 reasons, then, Ian, about why... So Ian, give us the 2 most common reasons why the kind of heuristics or objections people will make in order to blind themselves to something so self-evident.
Brilliant question. I'm going to use your answer. I want to talk a bit deeper about this Benteke situation then. So I can see that you're bringing data for players you want to sign. I can see you then have a manager who... is very sort of, should we say, set in his ways and very keen on specific certain players. And look, he's ended up as the Liverpool manager, right? So he should also back his own knowledge of the game. And I think gut feel is sometimes underrated. And we can talk about gut feel actually and how it combines with data later in the conversation. But would you then, if he said it's Benteke, would you bring the data that says why it shouldn't be Benteke rather than just the data that says why it should be somebody else?
Yes, is the short answer. So Benteke was a target man style striker, and we just didn't play with a target man. And I did a whole trawl of European leagues to say, the idea was at Liverpool he wouldn't play in that style. He only played that way because that's the way Villa played. He could become a much more dynamic forward at Liverpool. And again, if you have 10 seasons of 5 leagues of European data, you can ask the question, well, does this happen? So you take all the players who look a similar profile to Benteke, look at all of their transfers, some of them to bigger clubs. Do they change? And the answer was they didn't change. And so that's not to say he can't change. It's not to say you're wrong, but just to say, looking at the evidence, this doesn't happen. So you're banking on something special happening in this case. And again, data's never the whole answer with football, but it gives you a benchmark to say, well, how special or how much of an outlier does this have to be for it to work in the way you think it's going to work? And Benteke ended up playing in the same style at Liverpool, which is not Benteke's fault. It's what happens. He scored at a reasonable rate at Liverpool, but he's just the wrong player and the wrong system.
Can I go back to the conversation we were having before this about Mo Salah? And we'd got to the point, and we can combine these 2 bits together, Will, so it all makes sense. So we'd spoken about the fact that, the data was telling you that Mo actually would be a great player, and the job was to forget the kind of the history at Chelsea and the other things. Would you take us into the room where the conversation was had about Mo Salah, the data you presented, and the reaction particularly from Jurgen, who was, until that point, still thinking that Brandt is the guy?
So
Something we talk about a lot on high performance is marginal gains. This idea that success doesn't happen overnight, whether that's sport, business, or life, that it's actually built through small, consistent actions that compound over time. And the same applies to investing. It's not about chasing trends or getting lucky. It's like all investing. Crypto carries risks. So it's about patience, it's about structure, it's about making disciplined decisions. And that's where Gemini Exchange comes in, a secure, FCA-registered crypto exchange built to help people invest with confidence. Gemini's been around for over a decade, earning trust through its focus on safety, reliability, and tools to help its users build their crypto portfolios. With Gemini, investors can buy crypto in just a few taps and then choose how to build through staking, recurring buys, or advanced trading tools like Active Trader, which lets investors set up custom views, charts, and alerts so you can trade and manage your portfolio all in one place. It's a simple, structured way to invest, focused on long-term growth, not short-term noise, because performance isn't about chance, it's about clarity and control. Signing up is free, so start investing today at gemini.com/HP. That's gemini.com/HP. I think most fans have said at some point, one day I'm going to follow a World Cup. It is the ultimate bucket list trip, right? It's certainly on my bucket list. And if you're going to do it, Seattle is the place to make it happen in 2026. Now, one of the things that I love about Seattle, and I've traveled all around the US, is how walkable and compact the place feels. So the stadium sits right next to downtown, so you can step out of the match and straight into the city's buzz. The weather is perfect for football. Those mild summer days that the city's famous for will make all the games feel enjoyable. Nature is everywhere. There's gorgeous waterfront views, breathtaking mountain backdrops. Honestly, this is like an American city where the outdoors always feels within reach. And when it's time to refuel, Seattle also delivers fresh seafood at Pike Place Market, world-class coffee, craft beer, and a wine scene that rivals the best. You can then cap off your day with skyline views from the Space Needle or sunset over Puget Sound. This isn't just a World Cup trip. This is an experience that you would never forget. If you want to discover more, go to visitseattle.org and start planning your perfect summer of football.
The data never made it into the presentation because that's not Jurgen's style of thinking or style of learning. So he's aware of what we do and the fact that data analysis is a big contribution to which names are on the shortlist. So typically what would happen is a 20 or a 30 minute video reel of the players on the shortlist.
And who'd be in this meeting?
So that would be the sporting director, Jurgen, maybe the head of recruitment or the chief scout. I was very rarely in those meetings. I hate to say I wasn't in the Mo meeting, for example. But the data would have informed the sort of clips that were shown, strengths and weaknesses and so on. But those clips would come with a voiceover to say, Jurgen, you don't know this player in detail, so let me explain to you who this player is and why we think he's a good signing.
And who would do that voiceover?
That would be Michael Edwards, who is the sporting director and my boss. And so, over the clips, it was like, this is the role he plays for Roma. He'd be a slightly different role for Liverpool, but you can see how the things he does at Roma would translate very easily to Liverpool. This is his history. This is who he is as a player. Jurgen's someone who loves a story of adversity. So the fact that Mo had failed, that was a positive to Jurgen when it would be a negative to lots of managers. And it's like, he's gone to do this in Italy after a terrible experience at Chelsea. So you can paint that failure in a positive way to say, he's got some grittiness, some determination to succeed. And the same would happen for Brandt. And we were positive on Brandt. It would be a good signing, just not the ideal signing. And Jurgen had the final decision. So Jurgen saw players in a similar way to data, so it was rare we'd have big disagreements on who's a good player or not, and a similar way to scouting. So usually only good things could come from that conversation. If we'd have signed Brandt, I think it would have been a good signing for Liverpool, just not a great signing, but we wouldn't have been sort of incredibly, we'd have been unhappy at missing out on Mo, but it was like, this is not a mistake for the club, this is a good signing for the club. And really, it's down to Jurgen. Like, we sort of paint an honest picture of these players. This one was a case where Mo was clearly the number one, and this is our honest picture that he's number one. It also helped it was the second transfer window, because that first transfer window had been successful, signed Mane, Wijnaldum. There was one other, Matip, of course, that came to the club. So having been through that process once, Jurgen trusted what he was seeing, that it wasn't, selected highlights to try and put a false view. We weren't putting a false negative view on Brandt. We weren't putting a false positive view on Mo. So that helped. He already had some trust and said, again, the leadership to say, you know what, I was wrong. You've convinced me, let's do it.
And at what stage then would you get from, so you narrow it down now, you're looking at Mo Salah, you've got Jurgen Klopp on board with it. Where does the sort of psychological profiling then take place, where you'd go, understanding how that failure from Chelsea was processed and what sort of character he was in adversity? Yeah. Where would that happen?
Yeah, there's not so much science and data behind that, but we had staff in the scouting department, and also Michael would pay a lot of attention to that psychological side, because Jurgen put a lot of weight on character, like the makeup of personalities in the squad. He liked fighters. Well, I was going to say he liked winners. He didn't like winners. He liked fighters that would sort of give their all to win, whether they won or lost would be secondary to the attitudes that you bring. And that comes from, using your network.
Yeah.
Sometimes, someone who knows the player. But it's all very, it's not systematic and it's not data driven.
But then that's a really interesting point, that around he liked fighters. Could you find data that would validate whether somebody was a fighter or not?
It's hard because you can say, well, okay, when the team's 1-0 down, this player's performances are better, but to say, is that repeatable? And is that because he's a fighter? And if he was a fighter, maybe they wouldn't have gone 1-0 down in the first place.
Right.
So, the data certainly paints a picture, and you can put a narrative behind it, but you have to be very careful about hygiene to say, this is what the data says. To assign a psychological narrative to that is dangerous.
But was there any character points, though, where you felt the data gave you a clear line of sight from a certain characteristic that a manager might like, and you could say, well, this evidence gives us some pretty robust data that is exactly who he is?
Yeah, I think, again, it's like some data can suggest those things, like availability, for example, of being this physically robust, but mentally robust is part of that as well. Sure. And we can do analysis on this to say, this guy for availability is 90th percentile. In big games, this player always performs to his level or above his level and not below his level. And you could interpret that. I'm not a psychologist, so I can't give an explicit answer, because I don't know if it's valid or not to say, it's because he's a fighter, it's because he's got a great character.
But the reason I ask, Ian, is that I'm reminded, as you're talking about some of these character traits, that one of Alex Ferguson's great demands of his players was, he said, I want players that are courageous, and in his definition is the guy that's demanding the ball when we're getting beat 1-0 rather than the guy that wants it only when we're 3-0 up and coasting. So there must be some data that would give you evidence of courage, for example.
Yeah, so a good example of that, so, involvement, if your involvement is low, that kind of says you're not on the ball. Now, there might be, if you're on a low possession team, you need to adjust for these things and do a rigorous analysis of it. So not being involved very much, you could sort of say that's not the sort of player we want. The courageous point is something that the analysis can point to. So I talk in the book about pass completion percentages. Yep. And if you make an easy pass back to the goalkeeper, your completion percentage is going to be high. And again, Jurgen liked the risk-taking players, might have a much lower pass completion percentage. If you're trying a difficult pass that's going to break a line or going to create a chance, of course it's going to be less likely to succeed. The question is, are you outperforming if you're making those passes 6 times out of 10, whereas our current player only makes them 5 times out of 10? Your 6 out of 10 is better than my 10 out of 10, which is all back to the goalkeeper. And so that sort of that speaks somewhat to bravery on the ball.
Yep.
You're not going to draw me on tying it directly to psychology, but it all paints a picture.
Yeah, of course.
I'd like to talk to you about bravery on the ball, because I think one of the great signings in the last few years is obviously Alisson. I saw an interview with Aaron Ramsdale recently saying Alisson and Ederson changed the game for goalkeeping. So I remember when Liverpool first signed him, and you remember in the first few games he tried a Cruyff turn in a match and I was watching it thinking, who have they bought that's brave enough to do that? I'd love to talk about the process of finding Alisson, whether it was the manager saying, I want this kind of a goalkeeper that's doing what goalkeepers have never done before, or whether the data was telling you that the direction of the game is going to turn a goalkeeper into your 5th defender or your sort of 11th outfield player. And also what you thought of that Cruyff turn early in his time at Liverpool.
Yeah, I think I was probably thinking, please don't try another Cruyff turn. But that's the player that you get, and I'd prefer Alisson with a Cruyff turn to another goalkeeper who maybe doesn't do a Cruyff turn. I think the number one aim for a goalkeeper is to keep the ball out of the net. He wears the special equipment, gloves, that he's allowed to touch the ball. That's a big part of the game. And our previous signing, Karius, had sort of made some mistakes in the Champions League final. It was very hard for him to get back from that. And also we understood that, so it would have been the January before Alisson was signed. We had one of the best attacks in Europe. But we did not have one of the best defences in Europe. It was maybe top 20 in Europe, something like that. And so to take the team to the next level, it's going to be very, very hard and expensive to go from number 3 to number 1 in attack, but much easier to go from number 20 to top 10 or top 5 in defence. And Virgil arriving in the January was a big part of that. And Alisson completed it. So here was a world-class goalkeeper. There were two options. Him or Black, who was at Atletico at the time, still is. And what was the difference between the two? They were I think they were 2 of the top 5 shot stoppers in the world. So you're getting a world-class shot stopper with either of them. We rated Oblak a little bit better for shot stopping. But then Atletico played a very defensive game. The sorts of chances that he was having to save were less similar to a team that played more openly, like Roma were an open team when we signed Alisson from them. And so the question is, the most important thing, they're both world-class at it, both a huge upgrade on our current goalkeepers. So the next question is, well, what else do they do? And playing out from the back with Jurgen, with Pep as well, that becomes a more and more important thing. And Alisson had proven he could do it. Oblak, it's not to say he can't play out from the back, but because of Atletico's style, there's no evidence really one way or the other. But a similar sort of thing with Mignolet, signing him from Sunderland. He'd been a brilliant shot stopper at Sunderland, started off really good at Liverpool for his sort of first season or so. But similarly with Sunderland, he'd never been sort of tested with his with the ball at his feet in the way that he was at Liverpool. His footwork was the reason it was Alisson. The other reason, of course, is like when you look at analysing performance, it's not just about performance, it's about how much that costs. So you always want to get the biggest bang for your buck. And that's not to say Liverpool were cheap, but if you're going to spend £1, I want to spend that £1 in the most effective way possible. And again, poor old Roma, in summer 2017, we'd signed Mo because they were in financial difficulties. Yeah. Atletico weren't in financial difficulties, and Roma were. Guess what? The price is a lot lower from Roma than it is from Atletico.
And all of the things that you've said there, great shot stopper, good with their feet, the club were in distress. people who are not data analysts could tell you that, right? So what were the data points that you were using with Alisson to back up what the human mind or the human eyes were seeing?
Yes, so I mean, expected goals is quite a common concept in the Premier League, at least. There's a flavour of expected goals that takes the trajectory of the ball into account, so you can see how difficult that save should have been. You can't use expected goals because a great chance that goes off target, you can't really reward. So, sometimes maybe the keeper's rushed out and forced them to go off target, but you can't really reward the goalkeeper too much for that. So you can ask questions like, what was Alisson's positioning? Was he in the best position to stop the shot? And then given his positioning, what's the chance that we'd assign to him stopping this shot, given its trajectory and given the number of defenders between him and the ball, and a lot of other data that you can use to measure these things. So
the data kind of tells you if he's making, not just making saves, but making saves that are hard saves to make.
Yeah, it's the goalkeeper's equivalent of the pass back to the goalkeeper.
Yeah.
If you tap the ball at me and I catch it, that's a shot on target that was saved by me, but you probably shouldn't pay too much attention because I just had to stand still.
And would any of this data be used with the players once they'd signed to say, we think you can improve in this area, or we think this is a development opportunity?
Yeah, in the early days, it was hard because it was event data, and event data just tells you who's on the ball, what they're doing, what happens next. So like, I'm in the centre circle, I pass it to you, you're on the edge of the box, you take a shot that's saved. And with that style of data, there's too much unseen in that data. So when you say, oh, you passed it backwards in this situation, you say, like, yeah, I had a defender right behind me, it was pass it back or lose the ball. So it waited until tracking data became available where you could see what all the off-ball players were doing. And even at that stage, there are things it doesn't see. So you have to be very careful in the messaging back to the players. So typically, the messaging came back via video analysis. So it's like our data is saying in this game, we allowed a lot of dangerous space defensively, and our analysis says it's because of these players' positionings. So that would go to the video analysis so they could check against that. And also the coach might say, you know what, that was our game plan. We're going to allow the chances to try and drag them onto us to create a counter-attack. So, maybe the players were doing what they were told to do. The most interesting stuff we did with the players was via the psychologist. And it was always this, even at the top of your game, you can sort of mistake performance for outcome. And I was surprised that players suffer from this, because when you're at the top of the game, you must intuitively understand your performance, but you still need some feedback on it. Yeah. And it was always the case of, one of our forwards had scored a lot of goals one season and wasn't scoring at the same rate the next season. What am I doing wrong? Part of it was his finishing had been incredible in that first season, and no one repeats that level of finishing performance. The data says, you can't continue converting at 50% more than we're estimating you should. So that was part of it. But then we had a look at, where are you receiving the ball? How many times are you receiving it? What are you doing in those situations? He was passing it a bit more, but we thought that was a good thing for the team, not necessarily a bad thing for the team. He was receiving the ball more per 90 minutes in more dangerous situations under a little bit more pressure. And the answer was, you're playing as well or better than last season. Ball doesn't always go in the net. Just keep doing what you're doing. With one of our top assist makers, let's say, again, that number of assists had gone down. And like, assist is a bit of a stupid stat anyway, because it's not really under your control. If I'm passing to Mo, he's going to finish it. If you're passing to me, I'm not going to finish it, And it was exactly the same story. It's like you're creating more chances per 90 minutes this season than you were last season. The forwards just aren't finishing them off. But we don't think that's anything to do with the quality of the chance you're creating. Right. It's just finishing, or things will turn around.
So you were able to give the players, actually through the data, again, some psychological safety, because the people who were doing the job that I used to do, talking about football, one of my frustrations was that we were very much scoreline analysts.
Yeah.
If a team wins on a penalty shootout, we praise them to high heaven and talk about how. And I remember doing it with Man United when they won in the Europa League. Wonderful performance, what a great season. I remember covering another team who lost on penalties in a final. I said they need a rebuild. And you're thinking, it's on the kick of a penalty that the media are deciding if a team or a manager or a club is a success or a failure. And you have to go so much deeper with those players because they'll see that and be impacted by that, I guess. And, there'll be managers that have lost their jobs because of poor results.
Absolutely.
Whose team have played brilliantly and the data is saying they're playing the best they've ever played.
Yeah, reversion to the mean is a manager killer, and it also kind of helps the new guy because I've lost 5 in a row. I probably could have got a win and 2 draws in those 5 games. The team's exactly the same, performs at the same level. The new manager does get a win and 2 draws, and the scoreboard journalism says, "Wow, he's really turned it around." There's a famous paper that sort of looks at the clubs that sacked their manager, performances went down and then went back up again, and they found equivalent set of clubs who'd had the same level of bad results but hadn't sacked their manager, and their results went back up in exactly the same way.
So there's no data actually that backs up this idea of a new manager bounce. That if you're struggling, if you sack your manager, you get better results.
There is a new manager bounce, and you do get better results, but it's nothing to do with the new manager. That's what it comes down to. It's because your results were lower than your performances in the games leading up to the sacking, and your results just sort of came back in line with the performances in the games where the new manager takes charge. We had this at Liverpool of, I think, Jurgen's first season. We rated ourselves as a very good team, kind of given up on the league because we were still in the Europa League. That was our best route into the Champions League for next season. But in 16-17 it would have been, we were struggling to get to 4th place, and our analysis was saying we're like the 2nd or 3rd best team in the country already, and we're young and we're going to get better. But we were like 5th, 4th, and even the owners, even people in the club didn't quite believe it. And the data's never perfect, but you sort of, here are the teams in the past that we've said. The data always gives you the past to compare against. To say all the teams we said were as good as we are today, they all were really good teams over the next 2 or 3 years. So even we didn't really believe it in-house sometimes. The data helped to say the results just weren't in line with those performances. And also talking about scoreboard journalism, in that season, I think we needed 76 points to finish 4th. So part of us struggling to finish 4th was the rest of the big 6 were having an amazing season that doesn't normally happen. So we were kind of looking worse than we should. So say 76 is usually enough for 3rd comfortably. And we're having to get that just to sneak 4th.
I remember Klopp not winning the Premier League with 97 points and 92 points?
97 and 92, yeah.
And Slot has just won it with...
He can get to 92 or 93.
But he's won it already, having got... How many points has Liverpool
84,
got?
84, something like that.
Right.
It's but that's he's won it with 84. Klopp didn't win it with 97. And that's, again, such an important thing to take into account, because I remember people going, this Jurgen Klopp guy's come over with this Gegenpress and this heavy metal football. It's not fucking working. And actually, the data was telling you it was. And I guess that was actually very important for Jurgen to know, but also for Fenway to know that actually don't listen to the people telling you that this manager maybe isn't working. The data tells us a different story.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like control the things you can control. You can't control Pep and Manchester City building the best team of all time with the resources that they had. Yeah. And, they did a brilliant job there, but with a level of resources we didn't have. So we couldn't control that, but it allowed us to concentrate on what we could control, which was, we built a great team. I wish we'd won more, of course, but
can I ask you? I'm interested in that discussion you said earlier, Ian, about the striker and getting the idea of performance equals outcome mixed up. Where would the driver for this data come from? Would you be the one offering it, or would it be the coaches and the players and the staff demanding it.
Yeah, on that sort of small number of games basis, we wouldn't be the drivers for that. We'd sort of answer questions that came in. And this was kind of like, let's say 10 games at the start of a season. And it was 4 goals instead of 7 at the start of the season. So that's not enough to say, this is a long-term pattern, you're declining or you're improving. So it's much more responsive. We'd say things over a much longer period of time. And so data really starts to win at the 1 season and 2 season levels. Yeah. So especially when it came to squad planning and squad analysis, to say this player is starting to produce at a really high level for a younger player or for an older player, of they're currently producing a bit less than last season, and I worry about what they'd produce next season. So we'd be more sort of forward with those longer term arguments and feedback.
But the reason I ask is because it's incumbent on the players or the coaches to ask the right questions to get the data and the answers off you. So what are the best questions that you were faced with that made you think, that made you start to delve a bit deeper into these numbers to be able to give them insights that they couldn't have gleaned elsewhere?
Yeah, I think it comes back to the tracking data again. There's a basketball analyst called Dean Oliver who's got a great quote that says, if I'm going to watch one game, I want to watch the game, or I want a coach to watch the game and tell me what he saw. But if I want to know about 1,000 games, I want to see the data, because I don't have the 3 years it's going to take for the coach to come back to me after having watched all of those games. But tracking data gets you closer because you can see where everyone is. It gets you closer to being able to say something about one game. I think the one that that comes back to me is the Konate signing. So Liverpool play a high press, and you've got a lot of responsibility and a lot of ground to cover as a defender with the sort of chances conceded under Klopp, at least. And Konate looked like a good young defender in the Bundesliga when we were doing the analysis on him. And it was the early days of our tracking model coming online. And the tracking model had this concept of how much space do you have to defend. So we were being told by the scouts, this player's fantastic. He does exactly what Liverpool need. And you look at the sort of more basic event data analysis, and it says Red Bull aren't a great defensive side. He's responsible for them not. He takes some responsibility for them not being a great defensive side. He puts fires out, but there are so many fires created that you have to take some responsibility for that. And the scouts just knew from watching a Red Bull game, they play suicide football, just sort of full press all the time, and that spoke to the scouts' eye when it came to. I can see that translates exactly to Liverpool. And so this tracking analysis showed us how much space you have to defend and how dangerous that space is, i.e. if there's like literally nobody behind you and you're on the halfway line versus there's a whole defence behind you and you're on the halfway line. And that kind of showed, when you increase the complexity of the data, Konate looks differentially better than he did, and that kind of came from the scouts going, no, he is a better player than you think he is.
That's a great story, because that's kind of the holy grail of what we're talking about here. Your data telling you one thing, but the scouts' human eye and experience either backing it up or telling you something else. But when it all comes together like that, I think that's the dream, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was always the challenge of when I say, you've got to try the forward pass if you want to get a reward in the way that we analyse the game. It's all about improving your chance of scoring a goal. The comeback was always, but maybe the backwards pass was the only option or the best option. And it's like, I knew that in specific cases that was the case, but I couldn't see it in the data. And so really it's the football experts that should drive the research agenda to say, this is what you're missing, this is what you can't see. And actually in the early days, it was, going back to that psychological safety point, it was like the honest answer was the data can't see it. So we put our best approximation in, but it's only an approximation. The specific instances you're pointing out to me where the data got it wrong, I'll put my hands up and say it was wrong. That's a conversation that a lot of people working at clubs can't have because they don't have that safety.
And it's so important. I want to talk to you about Virgil van Dijk because, I believe Fenway Sports Group have done an incredible job at Liverpool. And actually, if people read your book, there are so many plaudits and praises from you to them. I mean, the fact that in the early days with Brendan Rodgers, where he didn't quite see eye to eye with the stats department, it would have been an easy decision for them to stop spending the money, right? Sack you all, shut it down and work in a much more linear way. But they also want value for money, right? They're smart investors. So when you go to them and you say, we've seen a defender, his name's Virgil van Dijk, he's going to be the most expensive defender that anyone has ever bought on the planet. I imagine as an owner, that's when they go, whoa, hold on, right, now we really need to be convinced. So I'd love to know the inside story of how Virgil van Dijk became a world record transfer for Liverpool.
He's now been surpassed by a couple of more expensive ones, but it was definitely not in the Fenway playbook to break the world transfer record for Van Dijk. And then 6 months later, we broke the goalkeeper transfer record before Chelsea smashed it, signing Kepa a few weeks later. Going back to that 17-18 season, we had the classic Liverpool forward line of Salah, Firmino, Mane. I had Coutinho pulling the strings in midfield, like the player I absolutely love. The creative force of the team. He was a player that took too many shots from distance from my liking, but we can forgive him that. I think I mentioned earlier on, we rated ourselves as top 5 attack in the world, top 20 defence in the world. Those 4 players didn't start together very often because against a big team, that is a very attack-loaded team, even for a manager with an adventurous style like Jurgen was. And so it was clear we knew the next thing to do was rebuild the defence, and we were lucky in some ways. I say lucky, let's say took advantage of an opportunity that might not have arisen. PSG signed Neymar from Barcelona, and Barcelona didn't think they were going to do that because he had a stupid release clause. So Barcelona were desperate to sign a player. So that world record Van Dijk fee was paid for by Coutinho going to Barcelona. So it was effectively a swap of a world-class attacker, but we already had 3 others at the club. We were in quite a good position in attack. Swap that one world-class attacker for 2 world-class defenders, Van Dijk and Alisson.
And that's a big call because I'm sure the data would have said you can't get rid of Coutinho. He pulls the strings in the team. Is that right?
Yes, but there's this concept in football, as in many areas of life, of diminishing returns. And so for every extra attacker you put on who wants to take a shot, if you say Coutinho takes 5 shots a game, that's too high. Coutinho takes 3 shots a game, Mo takes 3 shots a game. You put them on the pitch together, you're not getting 6, you're getting 5 or 5.5 because they take shots from each other. So because our attack was so loaded, there was a diminishing returns. It was hard for us to put, well, I didn't have to do it, thankfully. It was hard for Jurgen to put all 4 players out on the pitch at the same time. Whereas, it was the opposite of diminishing returns. Great defender.
See, even that is so interesting because you see teams struggling to win a game in the 93rd minute and they put 2 more strikers on. They suddenly got 7 attacking players on the pitch. The pundits and the commentators go, well, they might score now. They've got 7. What an attacking team it is. But of course, it's not like that, is it? It's not 4 times more attacking than it was 20 minutes ago.
Yes, so someone needs to load the bullets for the strikers to fire the gun, in the old phrase.
Sorry, carry on.
So the question becomes: here's this opportunity. We wanted to strengthen the defence anyway, and Fenway would have spent to strengthen that defence. But now a whole sort of supermarket of options opens up to us that might not have. Fenway were always very happy to invest in the team. Any transfer profits that were made, happy to invest that back in the team. And here was a large amount of money. And it's literally because at the time, one of the biggest advantages of having Jurgen at the club was players loved him. They loved his football. They wanted to play for him. So convincing a player of the idea of coming to Liverpool, it was easy when Jurgen was in charge. So you see this guy with the big smile, that's why you're going to come to Liverpool, right? And it was literally like, who do you want? That being said, it's still hard to take players from other big Champions League teams. They don't want to sell to a competitor. Wages are typically a lot higher than non-Champions League teams. Virgil helped that he'd played brilliantly against Liverpool in the past, but he was the best under 27 defender outside a Champions League team. I think you put the Champions League teams in, he drops to like number 2 or number 3. Like, how is this guy not already playing for a top Champions League team?
And why do you think that was the case?
He took a long time to come to the boil, so he was probably underrated a little bit at Celtic. And at Celtic, it's hard to measure defenders. You don't have to defend; you just got the ball for 90 minutes, and so you only really see games against Rangers, games in Europe, where Celtic are now huge underdogs. And so you're not really seeing the set of things he has to do in the Premier League. I spoke before about the Premier League premium. If he was in a big German club or a big Spanish club, or a medium-sized German or Spanish club, we'd have seen the sort of challenges he has to face in the Premier League a lot more. So Southampton, great recruitment from them, but his seasons at Southampton really gave the evidence to show he's a great defender, playing above Southampton's level. Right. So he was 26 when we signed him, and so a late developer really. I think even the previous season at Southampton, we thought he was really good. It was quite funny that Fenway. There was an informal ban on signing players over the age of 24. You look at a lot of our good signings. Mo was 24, Sadio was 24, Firmino was 24, Robertson was 23 or 24, Matip was 24. As you know, I can just.
And why was that the case?
So that came from the top. The smart people that run the group. If you look at performance, and we spoke earlier about the aging curve, you get increasing performance to the age of 27, then it plateaus. It doesn't really decline very much. It's kind of like the minutes that decline more than the performance. So if the players can stay fit, they're going to keep producing for you into their 30s. And then there's also a transfer fee. So the idea is younger players command lower transfer fees. We sign them before their peak players. We can develop them to their peak and then take the maximum credit or the maximum amount of performance from the players. If they're signed when they're 24 or younger, there's a chance after 2 years, like happened with Coutinho, that a big club comes in with a transfer offer, and that gives you the sort of luxury of saying you can take a transfer profit on this player or continue to get performance on the pitch out of the player, whichever is the most important thing to the club at the time. So you look at 2018 and transfer profit for reinvestment was the most important thing. You look at I helped with the previous Mo renegotiation to take him through to the age of 33. And at that point, the correct decision for Liverpool was just to maximise the amount of performance you get out of Mo. If you sign a 24-year-old, you've got the luxury of, either option. You sign a 27-year-old, you're not going to take a transfer profit. If you sign a 21-year-old, you have to sort of be more patient with that player as they improve with the team.
So you were having to convince them then with Virgil to break the world record at the time. Yeah. And that he was over 24. So how did that come about? And was there ever a chance that you don't sign Virgil because of his age?
Yeah, I remember one of the owners saying, I don't know why are we looking at under 27? That's a really weird thing to do. In our defence, well, why were we looking at under 27? Because we really wanted Virgil. But in our defence, centre-back skews old. So centre-backs top ones continue producing into their mid-30s. I was impressed at how long Thiago Silva kept going at Chelsea. You know, he was always a brilliant player. But I was thinking, oh, come on, surely not another season out of him. So centre-backs skew older, and because of that, you can say 26 in centre-back years, a bit like dog years. 26 is 24 in forward years. We're going to get plenty of years out of him. There were 24-year-olds on the market that were for a lower transfer fee, maybe higher wages. So always look at the all-in cost. Journalists concentrate on the transfer fee, but it doesn't matter how you spend the money, it's the all-in cost. So that combination, you know, the high transfer fee, the wages were high as well, but maybe not as high as a player coming from a current Champions League team.
So I'm interested that you were involved in the last negotiation of Mo signing up until the age of, what was it? 30?
So he was 31 to 33, I think.
So given the high profile discussions that have been taking place this season, where he's now 33, I know you weren't there at the club, but I'm interested in what are the kind of questions you'd be firing back into the decision makers to help them make a more informed decision.
Yeah, I mean the parameters will have changed, but I'm going to guess that the decision making process was going to be very similar to what it was on the previous renewal. And the question I was asked, again, it's about, you know, Mo's a world class player today, but we're going to pay for him for 2 more years, and we the club care about that second year as much as we care about the first year. So what does that look like in terms of performance? And I was, because of the position Mo plays, and because, you know, winger or wide forward tends to skew a bit younger, I was convinced the answer was going to be, you know, don't renew his contract, spend the money elsewhere. The 2 problems with that were, as a world-class performer, you cannot replace his level of performance. So if you're going to spend that money elsewhere, you're going to have to accept that next season, the season after, you're going to have someone not as good as he is today playing in that position, even if they're going to get better in the future. And then the piece that was a surprise to me, I looked at Mo's cohort, his peer group, and I was really surprised to see the top-end forwards, the really top-end forwards who've got a history of robustness and availability, playing 3,000 minutes a season. The vast majority of them kept on going for another 2 seasons. So if you look at Mo's peer group, I can't remember all of the names, but the ones that I do remember were Ronaldo, kept going for years. Benzema kept going for years. Lewandowski kept going for years. I was like, I didn't expect that to happen. That's why you've always got to look at the data. And I remember doing this analysis and sending the email off saying, like, I really didn't expect to find this, but I'm kind of saying it's not a bad idea to extend him. I'd been sort of indoctrinated into this. Young players develop them. But in that special case, it wasn't a, you know, this is a 100%, you have to do this. It was this is not a bad business decision. It's not a bad sporting decision to extend.
And was Jurgen at that point going, look, I'll take the advice on whether we sign him or not? Or was he very much saying, this is Mo Salah, this player has to re-sign and you have to pay him what he wants to re-sign?
Yeah, I mean, for a manager to, with all of Jurgen's sort of plus points, for a manager to willingly wash their hands of a world-class player, that just doesn't happen. Yeah. So Jurgen, I think it's safe to say, I can't remember what his view was at the time, but I think it's safe to say he was in the pro-extension camp.
We've spoken about so many highlights and decisions that turned out really well. And we have to tell the truth about stats, right? That they're not, they're fallible, right? That they're not always correct. Would you be willing to take us into a time where you saw a player, you recommended a player, everything said this player is going to work, and actually the truth is that life isn't as simple as that?
Balotelli, we already spoke about. The strange thing with Balotelli was all of this kind of baggage that comes with him. He didn't really misbehave at Liverpool. He was just not really trusted, not given the opportunity. I don't want to sort of say it's all the manager's fault or all Balotelli's fault. He just didn't get the opportunity. Didn't produce at Liverpool in the same way he produced at other clubs. He didn't get on the pitch in the same way that Mo didn't get on the pitch at Chelsea. funnily enough, looking back at it, I mean, I'm happy to talk about failure, and this is not an excuse. But if you look at that expected goals to actual goals, it was Mario's unluckiest season by far. He's got like 1 league goal. I think he was worth 3 or 4 in 700 minutes. And then he left Liverpool and went back to finishing at the rate he has over his career. I think the other one's Naby Keita. So I'll hold my hand up, and I was his biggest fan. I was, people talk about the Mo signing and the Virgil signing as we have. I was way, way more excited about signing Naby Keita than either Mo or Virgil. He was, I'd never seen anything like him from a data point of view. I always look at the data first because that's my speciality. I prefer a video analyst to look at the video because that's their speciality. But I do watch players on video. So this guy looks so outstanding that it's rare that I'll sort of just see a player pop up in the data and then immediately start watching the video. And it's like, scouts are going to love this player as well. A lot of the players that pop up in the data, they've got something. Matip was a great player in the data, but he wasn't the most elegant. He's not like a nice footballer to watch. Naby really was like super skillful. Played as a destroying midfielder in Austria, stepped up to Bundesliga, played attacking midfielder in Bundesliga, still Leipzig's best ever season. So he played across 2 positions, stepped up Austria to Bundesliga, and every aspect of his game, winning the ball back, covering space, every pass was a through ball. I think I watched one of the pre-season games. He just sort of would put it on a plate for Sturridge every time. I was like, this guy's.
Was there a
brilliant.
data point as well that when you also went to the data, you went, oh wow, okay, the data is also telling me.
So that you've been among the best players as a defensive mid, and then next season change position and you're among the best players again. Rare to see that. Those line breaking passes from midfield. I was thinking like our forward line is going to love playing with this player.
Had someone at the club said, take a look at Naby Keita, or had you kind of seen him, delved, and then gone, oh, I'm now going to recommend this player? And
I think he was a data first signing. That's one of the reasons I was so excited about him. He really was like, we all agreed on Mo and knew about Mo. The data agreed, but I'm not going to say, if it wasn't for the data, we wouldn't. It helped the signing a lot, but it wasn't absolutely driven by it. I remember I kept on going on to Michael, my boss. Naby Keita, I've never seen anything like him. If you're serious about data and football, Naby's the player. We signed him, and when he played for us, he was really, really good. He was almost the level I expected him to be, and I expected him to be like top 10 in the world player, but he never played that many minutes for us.
Why was that?
Injury problems is number one, but I think one of the issues was he didn't quite fit the team in a way. I don't know if Jurgen realised before we signed him. So he'd played this defensive role, but then moved into a more attacking role. I think naturally he's more of a creator. He risks the ball every time. And our midfield, the much maligned Henderson and Milner midfield, they were the players they were for a reason, which was Jurgen demanded attacking width from the full-backs. So as a midfielder, you had to cover, you had a defensive job to do. And Naby could do that job, but for whatever reason, wasn't really interested with that starting role. I think like when he played, I think he played well, and I think he did enough to keep his place in the team. But there was some sort of mismatch there that I hadn't fully appreciated, and injuries played their part. So he hasn't succeeded after leaving Liverpool, and I think that is due to a build-up of. He didn't have an injury history before coming to Liverpool, but that's really spoiled his career. It's the ones that the failures are kind of more fun to talk about in some ways, because if you're a success, you've done everything right. There's no interest in pieces to ask.
And how would you deal with decisions that didn't work out personally?
I think so. I implemented this review process at the club where we go back over every transfer window, signings we made, signings other clubs had made as well, either players we'd wanted or didn't, we knew weren't for us. And so everyone wrote down, immediately the window ended, everyone wrote down their thoughts on each player. So you could go back and say, 2 years later, this player's been brilliant. And I was saying at the time in the data, he's done nothing, wouldn't sign him. Why? It helps you learn. Why wasn't the data seeing what this player would become? And then do the same thing when thinking about the players that didn't succeed, to rewind to before the day you signed them and say, knowing what I knew on this date, would I make the same decision again? Okay. It's hard to blind yourself to what actually happened. So I think with Naby, he's a player that I'd say, yeah, absolutely, I'd sign him again. Maybe there were other things on the sort of character side. I think he didn't speak English when he came to the club. So things the club could certainly have done better, but other things that may have sort of made us more cautious about the player.
And was anything ever said to you, given that you were the one that had spotted the data, you were so enthusiastic to go to Michael and sort of champion Naby's cause? Was that conversation ever had with you?
No. It's the short answer. Maybe they could just see me crying into my cup of coffee and they kind of knew it was best not to ask.
Yeah, leave him.
Look, we've spoken a lot about players. I want to talk about managers. So Arne Slot is now the Liverpool boss. Did you do work while you were there on who would be the perfect subsequent manager after Jurgen Klopp and why?
Yeah, we started to build manager recruitment analysis. That was kind of my last big project at the club, and then the people that took over from me would have finished off that project, I'm sure, before the Slot signing. Managers is hard because the correlation between manager and results is not as strong as with players. So with players, I'm happy to say what a player's done, so the data footprints that a player's left so far in their career. If there's been a couple of seasons of top level football and we've analysed the data in a good way, that's going to be a good prediction of what they're going to do for the next year or two of their career and whether they're going to be a good sign-in for us, because that past player performance repeats. What you've done in the past is predictive of what happens in the future. With managers, it's the correlation's a lot lower because there's a lot of important things at a club that the manager's not in control of. They can't control the wage bill. They can't control who's currently at the club when they turn up. Quite often they can't control which players get bought and sold. Certainly in Germany, that's the case. So manager recruitment analysis is way, way harder than player recruitment analysis because the past doesn't help you predict the future in the same way. So you have to look at other things. Yeah. So style of play is an important thing. And when I started the work, our style of play our squad is built for Jurgen's style of play. And so an important factor, if you want to have the minimum sort of disturbance from changing manager, a manager who plays a somewhat similar style, 4-3-3, attacking, counter-pressing. It doesn't have to be absolutely the same style as Slot, and the detailed tactics don't have to be the same. But, is the squad basically built for how the new manager wants to play? The second question is, you want to control for wage bill and you want to control for talent. So when you look at look at a manager's past performances, you want to ask the question of how much of that's due to the manager and how much of it is due to the talent that he had at his disposal. And was he in a good place relative to the other managers in the league or a bad place relative to the managers in the league? So we look at the wage bill of the club, look at the net transfer spending of the club, look at, our player analysis of did we think these players were good or not before the manager arrived. So
like this season, for example, you could look at Kieran McKenna at Ipswich and Ruben Amorim at Manchester United. And then the next thing you'd have to look at is look at the wages that Man United are paying compared to the wages that Ipswich are paying.
Yeah.
And suddenly two managers who are 2 or 3 places apart in the Premier League probably don't just swap places, but there's probably a huge divide as well. So that's how that would work.
Yeah, absolutely. And that style thing is kind of I don't know, it's overrated in my opinion, because people think about Jurgen and they think about Pep Guardiola, managers who've got the privilege to impose their style on a team. And most managers and most managers aren't those two. Most teams aren't Manchester City and Liverpool. So I think like pragmatism is a very underrated quality in managers. And so for lots of teams, I'd say, you know, look at the teams he's managed in the past. You say, well, sometimes he's used 3 at the back, sometimes he's used 4 at the back. It means he doesn't have a philosophy. He doesn't know his own mind. I'd say, well, look at the squads that he's got. Yep. Would you play 3 at the back with this squad? I certainly wouldn't. And that's it. You know, it's a club decision as to what philosophy you want. So Amorim's got some criticism for playing this 3-4-3 style in a squad that absolutely is not fit, not set up for that 3-4-3 style. But in his defence, he said, you know, this is my way of playing. This is what I'm going to do. I wasn't in the interview. Presumably in the interview, he says, I come to Manchester United, I'm going to play 3-4-3. And presumably there was some sort of discussion of, are you sure that works with our squad? Yep. Well, you know, 3-4-3 is my way. And so it's the club decision. If the managers come in saying, I'm going to be true to my philosophy, irrespective of results or irrespective of does the squad fit the results, you know, it's not the manager's fault. It's the club's fault for like hiring a manager who's a fundamentalist. Jurgen was always great at tweaking his system for the talent he had at his disposal. Yeah. One of our only concerns with Jurgen was he always played 4-2-3-1 at Dortmund, Lewandowski centre forward. It's like, well, we had Sturridge, but he's not the sort of lone centre forward in the same style as Lewandowski is. We had Firmino who could play there. He did play there in a first season of Jurgen, scored 10 goals in the league, but it's not his best position. And Jurgen's response wasn't, I need a proper centre forward. I've always played 4-2-3-1. He changed formation, invented the Firmino role. And, you know, that pragmatism, if Jurgen can be a pragmatist, come on, everyone else can be a bit of a pragmatist.
So
as well.
What did your shortlist say about Arne Slot?
Arne Slot, in that Jurgen template. So what did we see about Jurgen? One of the youngest squads in the league, winning the league with a super young squad, no talent in the squad, selling his best players. So Dortmund and Feyenoord operate in a very similar way, style of play similar to Jurgen as well. So in terms of a template of pretty much as close to as you can get as getting the Dortmund version of Jurgen was the Feyenoord version of Slot. It was more of a leap because Bundesliga and Dortmund and winning the Bundesliga, that is a higher level than Holland, but everything else matched. And from what you, sorry, just one last one on this. And from what you know, what obviously I appreciate you're not there anymore, but people talking football, is Arne Slot in the Jurgen Klopp mould of give me data, let me use it, or more in the Brendan Rodgers role of I'm not interested? Yeah, I guess one of the sort of interview questions, and I won't be silly enough to suggest it would be the make or break question. It's like, what's your experience of data analysis? What do you think about it? So from what I've heard, it's very analytical, sort of wants as much evidence for his decision as possible and very open to it. So much more in the Jurgen molds than the Brendan molds. Are you guys tight for time on your cards? Should we do the AI? It's at 1, you've got just. Okay, so should we do the AI bit, which I think is important for future proofing? Just one question on this. If it's a really amazing one, here we go. I'm sure it will.
But I'm interested in the analysis that you're talking about, looking at managers, because the book Soccernomics by Simon Cooper and Stefan Szymanski was written, I think, 15 years ago, and they tried to come up with the answer of how much does a coach influence a team's performance. In your experience, do you have an answer to that question?
Well, So Soccernomics is a great book and well worth your time. In my book, available in good bookstores, I called the chapter Schrodinger's Manager. So this idea of Schrodinger's cat, you don't know if they're alive or if they're dead. So managers are the same. You don't know if they're super important or not important at all. From the data analysis, they end up not looking important. And I kind of agree with the main conclusion that Simon Cooper makes, which is, once you look at the wage bills, that's the most important factor in determining where you're going to end up in the league. The top managers can add a lot. So I'd count Jurgen. We're not getting 90 points in 3 different seasons with a different manager to Jurgen. I think most, if you're a manager, most of them will perform to expectations, and then it becomes less about, is this manager going to increase the number of points you get, and more about the things that don't come out in the data. So they're really important for the things that are hard to measure in the data, like motivation. If you lose the dressing room, that's going to spoil your performance. But as we talked about the new manager bounce before, it's just a statistical illusion. I think it's more that the players feel a bit better that the manager's gone. It doesn't make the performance any better. Motivation, attracting players to the club, just sort of having a formation and a style of play that the fans like and that suits the players. All that's super important. You really need, every club needs a good manager. They're the most important person at the club, but not in a way that easily translates into data.
Right. Interesting. I'd like to talk about the future of this world. The advent of AI and the growth of AI has been incredible. What single area are you most excited about when it comes to football data analysis and looking forward?
I think one thing to say about AI is AI is just very complicated data analysis. You take some data and the AI will analyze it in ways more complicated than humans can understand. But today, football clubs are really bad at simple data analysis. So I'd say from a football club point of view, get the basics done first before we worry about AI. That being said, AI is already used when it comes to football data, mostly with football data collection. So computer vision algorithms, that tracking data that we get that shows where all the players are, it's not people noting down where the players are. It's an AI algorithm that watches the game and tells you exactly where the players were. Advances in those algorithms give you things like semi-automated, offside. They tell you the position of all of the players' limbs, which direction they're looking, are they making a kicking motion, that sort of thing. Without AI algorithms, that data collection doesn't happen. I think it gets to the stage where the real benefit for clubs is going to be the democratization of data more than, this amazing algorithm tells me the next Messi to sign. It'd be more that clubs that can't afford to today have the same set of tools at their disposal that a Premier League club does. AI will help them do that. So, just with a camera phone, or a few camera phones, you can record the game, translate that into the same quality of data or a similar quality of data that Premier League clubs get today. National League clubs don't have that quality of data because they can't afford to put all the cameras up in the gantry. They probably don't have a gantry. But the algorithms help with that simple stuff.
And if you were writing your book, How to Win the Premier League 2.0 in 2028, 2030, what do you think the world of data analysis and football would look like then?
I think we'd have a much better handle on that game-to-game analysis, a much closer feedback loop with the coaches and the video analysts. So in the book, I talk a lot about recruitment because that's where I spent most of my time. And one of the reasons why it's the first place where data is used at clubs is you got a large amount of data and thousands of minutes. But you need that because the data is imperfect. You need to see a lot because in any individual situation, you might not quite be seeing the right thing. So with the new data that's made available by AI algorithms, you can see the exact circumstances. So I think being able to say something about individual feedback, player performances in a game, the coach's plan in a game, have a discussion with a coach to say, what is your game plan? Measure how well that was implemented in a game. That's currently beyond where clubs are at. In 5 years' time, I think the more forward-thinking clubs would be there.
So I spent many years working in Formula One, and they use data because they have millions of data points on the car, far more data points than a footballer has on their body, right? Because it's being fed back to a computer. They will run a simulation of a Grand Prix, not 10 times or hundreds of times, but hundreds of thousands of times overnight before the race the following day, which will predict every possible outcome and where that might leave their car. So when something happens in a Grand Prix, it informs whether they pit or they don't pit, or they change tyres or they don't change tyres, right? I wonder if football is going to get to a point where you can run data analysis before a match and predict what lineups will give you and what substitutions during the game will give you what result.
Yes, certainly for lineups. With substitutions, you have to sort of start measuring fatigue and understanding, is an extra 10 minutes today going to be more of an injury risk? So you'd say less minutes today means you're going to stay fitter in the future. That's very, very difficult to do. Starting lineups, yes. So we already do this over the course of a season to say, your players are going to get injured. So we'll simulate the season, randomly injuring your players, and you get a little bit weaker in some simulations, a little bit stronger in other simulations. We're not yet at the point where we say, well, actually, as Liverpool, you want to put on a different defender against Benteke because he's super, his strengths are exactly in line with Liverpool's weaknesses. So we're not quite at that point yet. Some people claim to be. I think they're kind of, they're not really, they claim it, they're not really there yet. But that's something in the near future that will be solved.
So a manager could say, look, this is what I think my lineup is, but actually I'm going to ask AI what the best lineup is to beat the opposition in front of me tomorrow afternoon.
The one caveat to that is, unfortunately, football's played by humans, and so if the manager says, his head's not in the game today, I gave a presentation to some ex-Premier League footballers, and the guy running the day said, it would be great, it was to show the actual ratings season by season. This guy's going to be in the audience, Premier League winner, and so showed his performance season to season. It's like, we always thought you were a really good player, and actually when you won the league, we didn't think that was your best season, it was the following season. It's like, I don't know what happened here. He'd gone to like average Premier League level. It's like, that's the year my son was born. Slept for 2 hours a night. So I think getting robots to play instead of people, then you can start to say...
But of course, you can tell the AI this player's wife is due to give birth. You can tell the AI this player generally gets injured. You can ask the AI to watch a player's performance and work out how often it dips below the average for that player. So it feels like we're going to get to this point.
You can do all of these things. I think the challenge in football, and it's a challenge for AI in general, is I don't know if whenever you sat your exams, sometimes they'd ask a question and they didn't just want the answer. It would come with an extra task, which is explain your findings. And AI, I'm sure it will improve, but today it's hard. It's bad at explaining its findings. And so with football, because it's played by humans, because the manager's a human and needs to make those decisions, when I come to a manager and say the data says this about whatever, signing a player or not playing this player or this formation, first question is why? Convince me. And the kind of simple data analysis, because it's simple, you should be able to explain exactly why you're saying these things. With AI, it'll improve, but today the answer is quite often because the computer says so. And I don't know if it's you should take this line on the Formula One track. There's good physics and engineering reasons why that's the line to take. When it's like you should play Firmino instead of Salah or whatever.
Interesting. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Brilliant. Ian, that was really good. Thank you so much. I love that. Thanks.